Hello, I'm Zoe Coyle.
And I am Polly McGee, one of the two pilot lights on your screen or in your ears if you're listening to the podcast.
Yes. What are we going to talk about today, Polly-san?
Well, for those who have just joined us for the first time ever, magic, welcome to our cave full of sparkling diamonds. Zoe and I put this series together because we're facilitators, we run a leadership company, and we spend a lot of time in rooms with people where we get asked the same questions over and over. And we felt like there were some big concepts that we all bandy around in the world that we really hadn't spent a lot of time unpacking. So we took it upon ourselves on our little mission to unpack. So in this episode of Pilot Light Unpacks, we're going to talk about two big things which I think, Zoe, almost bring up the same level of kind of, oh God, no, as when we talk about shame, which are fear and anger. So I'm pretty excited because I think these are things that we don't speak about publicly often enough. And they're sort of things that we have signposted and coded as, no, they're wrong, we shouldn't do those, we should be like free of those because we're all evolved humans because we've read so many self-help books. But the reality is, for many of us, and we do the work as we talk about the work, these are the emotions which are in the front seat driving us off a cliff.
Absolutely.
Too dramatic?
I'm feeling quite angry.
I'm really afraid right now.
Well, podcast done, and we're out. Let's talk about anger first. The hot.
That's one for you because I don't ever get angry. I'm very calm.
So I get angry, but I get angry in righteous outrage. So it's a kind of silent, resentful, unexpressed anger. So
I think you do express anger pretty well as well.
Okay, thank you. Oh, you're good to me. I have a fairly full repertoire of people.
I was going to say you have a fairly full family.
Yes, true. I parent 4 small children, and I'm not the Dalai Lama. Not yet. There's my
not yet.
Mindset. So rage and anger, particularly in women, but I'm not excluding the lovely men that are out there, or indeed the horrible men that are out there listening to this. I want to talk about, I just want to flag Rebecca Traster's book, Good and Mad. That book changed my life. I read it last year, and I recommend it in every facilitation that we do, don't we, Polly? And it's an exploration of the Me Too campaign, but also it's an exploration of female rage and why. But as I say, it's interesting for men too. But historically, why female rage has been suppressed and so vilified. And the revelation for me was how much I'd embodied that. And what a blind spot I held around that, and how demonized I made my own anger. And so my process in that, and what we have seen in our facilitation rooms, haven't we, Polly, is the idea that rage and anger is so shameful to feel, such a collapse of integrity and self, that we push it out rather than using it, harnessing it as an energizing force or an agent of change. Yeah. So rage is also really interesting. And when we look at the sort of iceberg analogy, which is, the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg that's above the water. When you feel rage, it's really interesting to ask yourself, what is going on underneath? What is the emotion underneath? And as with all our podcasts and videos that we've done before, here again is the through line around self-awareness. And for me personally, when I dig into rage, the thing that's underneath it is fear. That's the axis for me. And in that self-knowledge, I can then take that fish hook out of my mouth and choose better behaviors. Behaviors that don't let me down, step out of my values, or lead me out of integrity. What's your experience of rage?
Actually really just wanted to talk more about your stuff here, because this quite fascinates me, because it's so active in you, and certainly that Rebecca Traster book really gave you such a deep insight into your process. And I'd actually just like to hear you talk about that a bit more, because I'd like to hear you talk about what it is to have that level of rage and where it comes from for you, and what the physical experience that is. And I'll talk about my stuff, but I'm so fascinated by this, because you're right, it's not a conversation you ever hear women having. And you really don't see women. I mean, I guess this plays back into that horrific psychotherapy stereotype of the hysteric, that any sign of emotion that isn't completely contained is madness. And that's all we've got to work with as women. So I'd love to actually hear you talk more about it.
I will. And I also, the idea, not only is it madness or hysteria, that it's grotesque. And that and look, this part of the conversation is going to be a bit gendered to me, because I'm going to speak about rage from the feminine perspective. And I hope that's not isolating for anyone out there. Come on the journey with me. You're included in this conversation. Everyone is welcome in this conversation. And I think it's vitally important that everybody is in this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the idea that the woman is as shrew, as defeminized, as revolting, as not soft and gentle. And look, I'm a very passionate person. And I felt a great deal of shame around that too, that I needed to be quieter, less opinionated, not too smart, not too shiny, not take up too much space. And the rage was a part of that. I have to say that also the way that anger and rage were role modeled to me in my childhood were pretty scary. So it wasn't just a societal thing. It was just, that strikes me as unevolved, and I don't want to get in. I don't want to mirror that behavior. But also, it came from a place of fear of, if I allow myself to experience that heat, what could I destroy? Yeah. Could it be other people, or could it be myself? Yeah. And kindness is very important to me. But what the Rebecca Traister book, and I think also getting older and having a fourth child and being at the end of my 30s and my early 40s, was a reckoning of self, of what parts of myself have I cauterized to make myself more palatable to an imaginary audience. Yeah. Like, who am I? And my experience is, as I say, very gendered. So Polly's heard these stories, but I had a period of 24 hours where I got into, and look, I'm not proud of this. I got into 4 fights with strangers in the space of 24 hours. And, I did say to my therapist, I think there might be something wrong with me. And he did say, let's have a look at why you're getting into these. What are you putting out into the world? But I'll give you the scenario of 2 of those, which was one, Polly and I fly around the country a lot in our work. And I get really, really tired of men, and it's always men, taking up the armrest and taking up the leg space. So I will, be sitting there and the armrest is taken up my leg space. And look, I love men. I'm married to one. I have 2. The children have a series of gorgeous brothers. I'm not grinding an axe there, but just what society tells us how much space we're allowed to take up. And as I've got older, I feel increasingly angry that I'm told like this, that I'm not allowed to take up the space of the chair that I have bought. And so I turned to the dude beside me and I said, before I'd processed what was going on, because I was tired, and I'd said to him, I see that you're going to use our armrest first, and good on you. And how do you want to do that? Do you want to do half the flight for you and then half the flight for me? Or should we do it in 10-minute about turns like I do with my kids? And he looked at me as if I had said to him, I'm going to put a gun in your mouth and I'm going to pull the trigger. He just went, and then he looked ahead, and then he swore under his breath, So there's a whole lot of labeling me as sort of out of control. Interesting, he did take his arm off the armrest. So I had it and I said, thank you. And a woman a few rows back just started clapping. And then another woman who walked out sort of shook my hand. I had that moment. And then, when we got to the, he sort of looked at me like I was a crazy woman. Look, he had felt my rage. I could have been kinder and I tried to be helpful, but there was this simmering rage. And then I got to the taxi queue and the driver wouldn't let me sit in the front. He said, women go in the back. And this was my 4th argument in the 24 hours. And look, I didn't deal with it very well. And I raised my voice, and he took my bag out of the back and threw it into the road. And I did some screamy, shouty. I'm going to dominate you with my intellect. I'm going to crush you. Totally out of my integrity, totally out of my value set. And then when I got another taxi, I cried. And I felt very ashamed of myself. Actually, a really funny aside, there was this British traveller, this guy in the taxi line, and I'd sort of been shrieking, and I may or may not have kicked the taxi. And he said, oh my God, is this what women are like in Australia? This is like Crocodile Dundee. Anyway, when I got home and I was in a safe place, I had a shower and I put my babies to bed and I did a little bit more crying and I had a gin and tonic. I looked back at this process of what happened to me in that 24 hours, and where was my rage healthy and where was it not. And the really simple distillation that arrived for me was, if I'd felt my anger earlier in the day, I wouldn't have hemorrhaged it in that really unseemly way over that man, because I wasn't going to change his opinion. And I'm not talking about staying silent. That wasn't what I wanted to do or what I want to do in those situations. But I don't want to scream at people. I don't know what's going on in his life, what trauma he's had, what his religious context is for the way he treated me. And I didn't behave kindly in that situation. So through thinking about rage, though, now my experience of it is I feel it, I take ownership of it, I look clearly at what is going on underneath. Am I in a state of fear? If I'm righteous, why do I feel righteous? What is it that I'm wanting the other person to do? Because that's problematic, because my ego has jumped up there. And I can do the beautiful, beautiful Buddhist teaching of, other than self-compassion, I can come back to self-compassion, recognizing the emotion, of course, but soften my front. Soft front, strong back. And that doesn't mean that I become passive and I get moved around by my rage. It means that I can express my anger, but I can do it in a healthy and respectful way without sliding another person, without destroying, because that's not who I want to be. And it's certainly not what I want to role model to my children. And God knows we have enough rage in the world at the moment and enough separateness. And I don't want to contribute to that one jot. So that's a very long-winded answer. Is that at all helpful, Polly?
Dear audience, you can write in and thank me later for Zoe telling those stories. You fell right into my trap. No, but I love it so much, because again, it's like, so I would say that I'm I have a lot of very unexpressed anger. I never ever do that stuff. And I never have ever done it, because my experience of life from my childhood was that you just keep quiet and you make everything as right as possible. And whatever you're experiencing is not relevant, because other people are suffering more than you right now. So just be quiet and get on with it. And this is not a good or bad situation. In fact, that is a poor situation, because anything that's unexpressed, anger is symptomatic of fear. Unexpressed anger, bottled down anger, eaten up anger, internalized anger, it comes out in the same way. It just doesn't come out at force. It comes out in a really creeping, corroding and toxic way all through your body. So it's really interesting. And I think I want you to tell the stories, because I vicariously love to live through someone who can actually express rage. But like you, it's a good explosion. But the reality is that the self-awareness piece asks us to step back and what the hell is going on? Because if we're working into our values, and particularly your values and my values, as we've expressed in our values video, those values aren't about pushing people away. And if we're working towards oneness and connectivity, the only way to just dissolve those barriers are through empathy and kindness, which is really hard to do when you're freaking off your face with anger. So it's interesting to see, and as you say, if we live in a world as we do, where there is so much unmodulated rage, mainly in men, but also in women to a much more controlled degree because of the way that we've been socialized, we have to ask about that iceberg, and we have to ask what it is that's happening that is making people so upset and so unseen and so unloved and so unconnected that they are fighting for their lives constantly. And that's a really great concern. And I think this is where, when we're thinking about doing this video, whether we do fear and anger together or whether we do them separately, they're like a coin. And for me, fear is the iceberg, and the tip is the behaviors that we see. And we talked about it in one of our earlier videos, that idea around language, and that if you, I think it was in the empathy video, if you don't have a really wide range of emotions that you can access quickly in terms of understanding how do I feel beyond sad, mad, glad, if you don't have them, the actual action that happens is that it comes out of you physically. If you can't articulate it, which doesn't mean to intellectualize it, it means if you can't say, I really feel like this, which is a diffusion technique, you're going to punch on. And we're seeing that. We're in such a volatile world right now. But fear is the driver, and the fear is the thing that sits underneath everything in this kind of limbic mode of our primal selves. You know, our brains haven't evolved. They've got bigger, but the same chemical triggers which are in them, fight or flight. Is the saber-toothed tiger coming at me? We're doing it all the time with the most mundane urban and rural situations. We still go into that. So fight or flight, fear or anger. And we need to be able to have exactly as you say, Zoe, that moment of going, what's happening here? Why am I so terrified? Why am I so angry? What has happened before? What is the story? What is the lineage of this anger? That means that this taxi driver's copping it, but really I should have said this 25 years ago to my father or to my mother or to some primal childhood wound.
Absolutely. And I'd love you to speak to that question that we get quite a lot, Polly, which is, I don't like feeling afraid, and how do I get rid of it? Can you talk to that?
I think this is a massive one for all of us, because it's like all the things we don't like. Sitting in the discomfort, fear is in the discomfort. And so and let's just separate this out too, because I think there's probably different flavors of fear. When a saber-toothed tiger or whatever the contemporary equivalent of that is coming at you, our bodies are designed to move, to fight or flight, to save us. Our primal instinct is survival. And back in the day when we were living in caves and we were roaming around, we needed that. That was what we needed to make sure that we got another generation out of us before we were eaten by that tiger. Now when we don't have that, I think for many people there's not a lot of situations where we are in that true fight or flight. Our life is in danger. And of course I acknowledge that for many people in different parts of the world that is a daily reality. But for me, I'll speak for me, in my environment of living in a Western world with education, with security, with a house with walls around me, I'm not facing that all the time. So the fear that I have is a much more personality-based fear. It's much more around not being enough, not belonging. And this circles back into this primal tribal expression of our brains. If we are thrown out of the tribe in a ye olde context, in the cave world, we die. We need to be part of the unit which keeps us safe. So one of the things that we know from the research is really driving a lot of that fear is the fear of not belonging and the fear of a lack of connection, the fear of not being enough. So when situations happen where we are swallowing that fear, it's generally because we think we've said or done something that is going to make us unlovable, and that the unlovableness means we're going to be abandoned into the world on our own forever. And that is one of the most terrifying things to a human that you can offer them.
And you can't eradicate fear, though, can you? I mean, we talk about this a lot in the room, and we invite, once again, a lens shift, which is that fear. And as you've talked about, there are different types of fear, but let's talk about it, say, in the workspace. The fear that happens in the workspace, as long as, to use the metaphor of driving a car, as long as it's not, if you're in a car, as long as it's not driving the car, if you acknowledge that it's there to keep you safe and put it in the back, it's a subtle but powerful lens shift. And you're not going to be able to get rid of your fear, because whenever you do anything courageous, whenever you choose to step up and in your life, fear is going to come with you. It's going to be your companion. So it's not about trying to kill fear. It's trying to make peace with it.
And understand it like it's a tool.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
because it's chemically driven, again, I'll say it once, I'll say it 100,000 times. We feel fear. We don't think fear. We feel courage. We don't think courage. If we thought courage, we would never do a courageous act in our lives, because we move instinctively into situations of help with people and into courageous situations. You talk to anyone who's been a hero in some way, they'll say, I don't even remember deciding to do it. I just stepped in front of that car and grabbed that child, or I just got that woman from the building.
I do say that all the time.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't want to name you up because it was embarrassing to talk about you so much.
I've saved all the children.
All the children. I feel like often you might be pushing your children in front of a car.
Oh
yes. No, that's me.
No, I push and then I save. It's complex.
It's like Stockholm syndrome. Oh, is that Munchausen's by proxy? Anyway, I think that it's really great to bring up courage, because what people seem to think is that all of these things operate separately. Fear is an integral part of courage, and you can't have one without the other. Fear is, if we take fear out of the binary, if we take emotion and feeling out of the binary, that there's a set of good feelings to have and a set of bad feelings to have. If we look at a spectrum of experience, which is fear is one of the spectrum, happiness, joy, pain, sadness, rather than all those bad ones go over here and all those good ones we work towards, if we just have them as a spectrum of experience, inseparable, that is the most profound lens change that we can have. Because then we can identify them as the observer. We aren't attaching to them. We aren't attaching reaction to them. So we're like, oh, there's that feeling again. Now, you and I both do a lot of public speaking, which is what the number one most horrific thing in the world for people to experience, more terrifying than death, which I find so bizarre. So there's never a point, no matter how many years I speak in front of whatever size audiences, that I don't get butterflies in my tummy and I don't feel a sense of before I perform. And any kind of speaking for me is stepping into a performative persona. And of course, you can speak to this in actual more experience and eloquence as soon as I'm done with this little monologue.
No, not at all.
And that's fear. That's fear in operation. But that fear isn't motivated to me. That fear is saying, these are people that you're in service to. You have to step up. You have to step in. You have to give them everything, and you have to do it and be prepared to make a mistake, forget what you're going to say, look like an idiot, use the wrong word, maybe wet my pants. I don't know what could happen.
Last time.
So in all of the things that might be part of that, I'm choosing to go in. But so given that you are actually a professional actress and...
Not anymore. I used to be.
You played the bard.
I think let's talk about what you can do when you feel fear. I think you're going to get sick of this, me talking about this all the time, but awareness is the first step. Oh, this is the emotion that I'm feeling. And then understanding the story of that for you. So fear for me is around feeling unsafe. And then I can just literally say to myself, as I would as a child, Zoe, you're safe. And it starts to unwind the process of it, cranking up. The other thing is to look at it with perspective. Yeah. So I'm not in denial. It's not, don't look at the elephant in the room. I'm not in denial. Look at it in a perspective. So holding that. And then it is using breath. And Polly and I talk about this a lot. So 3 deep breaths. That is a beautiful way to counter the stress hormones of adrenaline and cortisol that are crazing through your system. You can use box breathing, which is breathing in for 4, holding for 4, breathing out for 4, holding for 4. That's a beautiful structure. It also gives you a lovely visualization for those of you that are visual. Using your diaphragm. So when we talk about deep breaths, we're not talking about snatching it into your chest. We're talking about deep breathing using all of your lungs to oxygenate your system. So you're oxygenating your brain, and those stress hormones, they come out on the exhalation. So breath is a really great one to help with fear. The other thing I do, and I sort of touched on this earlier, and I probably does too, is I thank my fear. Because when I get up and public speak, and like you, Polly, I've been doing it for years, very occasionally because I may be chronically underslept or I haven't brought myself into the present, I don't have the moment of nerves, and then I worry. I don't have that spike of fear. And so I actually go looking for it in myself. Because what the fear does also delivers me is, this is really important. And I want this to be important because I don't want to waste people's time. And I want to bring my A game. I'm not about coming up there and just dialing it in. So I will go and look for it, and I will literally think about the people and the souls that are going to be sitting there, and that their time is precious, and that I want to bring the respect to that. And then when I feel, and I love that analogy of the butterflies, I feel them taking off in my tummy hole, and I have that sense of, oh, okay, I'm ready to go. And then it's just when it gets too out of control, that's when I use my breath and I use my focus. I bring my focus back into the room rather than focusing on the fear, focusing on the job that I'm going to do, focusing on the why I'm there. What am I there to share? Focusing on the other person. You know, even if you're doing all the speaking, when you get up and do a 45-minute presentation or an hour-long keynote, you are still in conversation. You're still there wanting something for your audience. And if you're clear about your why, it gets you off thinking about yourself. Because if you start to get lost in that loop of, they're going to think I'm an idiot, I'm not the expert here, this was the wrong shirt to wear, I forgot to have breakfast, it's all taking you out. And what's happening is more and more adrenaline and cortisol is being drenched into your system. And as we know how brains work, you are back facing that saber-toothed tiger, even though you're just giving a public speech. So those are some of the tools. But the primary thing is get curious. What does your fear mean to you? When does it come up and why? And work out what is a strategy for you to help befriend it. And the same is with your rage and your anger. When is it healthy? When is it not? When does it come up? And when is it actually about a scenario, or when is it actually more about your childhood? So you're in a transference model. And I highly recommend, and Polly would too, for you to look into that if you don't know about transference models. The work that we've done being trained in that has been, well, for me, deeply life-changing. So bring your curiosity to that too. And we've said this before in various videos, work out your own stuff so you're not working it out on other people. So that what you have to offer is the best, most gracious, kindest version of yourself. And that is your contribution. And I'm going to get up on the soapbox now, Polly. I know you love it when I do that on my rickety space. That's your contribution to us as a species moving forward. It's not the degradation that we so often seeing happening, that hemorrhaging of rage and ugliness. And when I talk about rage, I'm talking about it in that bad frame, which is about destroying the other, about winning. Oh, that's a key point for me too. If my anger is connected to winning, I know I'm in trouble. I know that that is my ego. I know that that is not healthy. I need to stop and bring it back, because winning is just that to the other.
Yeah. It's so true, Zoe, and that was a beautiful rendition of all of the different bits and pieces. And we're going to do a whole video on breathing, because both of us are obsessed with it and the power of the breath. So look forward to that in the series. So I think the key distillation for us, for you about this, is that fear is an inherent part of who we are. It's hormonal. It is a bodily, physical response. We can't control it with our brains. But what we can do is we can make friends with it. As Zoe said, we can have awareness about what it feels like leading up to it and what it feels like coming out of it. And we can take responsibility for it. We're never going to be able to get all of our ducks in a row all the time when it's emotional. But if you do have a massive spaff at someone, you can say, oh, hey, that wasn't cool. I'm not cool about this. I'm really sorry. I'm going to go and sort that out. And as I said, I think the key thing is that our wounding happens primarily in our early childhood and later in our teen years. Whatever we're angry about, whatever we're frightened of, most of that will have been layered on for us subconsciously when we're really young. Follow the trail of breadcrumbs. Sit with yourself and ask yourself, when have I felt this before? When have I felt this before? When have I felt this before? There's a beautiful story about the Buddha becoming enlightened, and he has a moment where he's done all these austerities when he's still Gautama. He's not even the Buddha at that stage. And he's been hungry, and he's just like, he sort of got to the end of his tether, and he's realized that austerities and starving and fasting aren't the way to feel joy. And he has a moment where he remembers as a child sitting under a tree in a field watching his father plowing the field, not having to do anything, and that a sense of just pure stillness and happiness washed over him. And he has a moment of realizing that what joy is, the release of suffering, is the moment of feeling just this spacious, beautiful, joyful calm that comes from nowhere. It's ineffable. It is just deeply coming up from within. And I think that's really the important moment. We talk about following the breadcrumbs to the moments of pain in your life. You can also follow those breadcrumbs to moments of pure joy without any inciting incident, just moments when you felt truly happy and truly joyful. You can do both of those things, which will help you gain an awareness of how to bring that integration together. The same place that the joy comes from is the same place that the fear comes from. And all of that is of us, and all of it is within us. And that's the beautiful thing. It's not done to us. We do it to ourselves.
And I think it's important to say, that our energy is contagious. So take responsibility for yours. If you walk into your workspace or into your home continually in an angry, disgruntled frame, we know from the research, but we also know as recipients, right? It's contagious. So who do you want to be in the world? What sort of energy do you want to bring? And I'm not talking about being a fake. I'm not talking about coming in and, being in every space. Oh, I just thought about Tony Robbins in that moment on his little trampoline.
I was thinking about David Brent.
We should all think about David Brent. But it is that idea of, okay, if you're arriving at work and you've had a tough morning with your family or are going through something personally, there is a choice to be made too. And that is courage as well. I think we often think of courage as sort of, a sword in one hand. And courage can be choosing grace. courage can be getting out of bed. Courage can just be the turning up. I'm a big believer in that, the turning up. But it can be choosing to let go of what feels really activated inside you and working it out over Mindy and Paul and Johnny, and just turning up and being present. And obviously, as you know from this podcast, I've obviously got the whole anger thing totally licked. so you should listen to me. No, in all honesty, I mean, I come from a place of supreme humility in this. And also, I'm still asking the questions. I'm still asking the questions as a woman, as a human being, as a mother. When is anger useful? And I know that it is, but only when it's conscious and only when it's not about destruction. And that's I think it's really fascinating, and we love being in rooms with people having these conversations, don't we, Polly, with those that suppress, and those that think it's their right to call people every name under the sun.
Yeah. And look, let's wind it up with popping that iceberg to bed, and I'll reinforce it. Anyone thinks for a minute what you're seeing here is a teaching, what you're seeing here is a dialogue, because we all walk this earth learning and learning and learning, and it's a real joy and a privilege to be able to have these kind of discussions. That's what the Pilot Light Unpacked series is all about. It's us unpacking ourselves on each other and into the world and trying to make sense of everything so we can each get a little mouthful of that equanimity. If you want to get in contact with us, or if you want to watch the other videos or listen to the podcasts, you can find us at www.pilotlight.co. No M on R thing.
Oh,
Zoe.
no, we're opposed to M's. Goodbye, darling.
Thank you for being with us. See you later.
Bye.